My lords, I really support the comments made by the noble Lord, Lord Fox, very articulately and legally adept at explaining some of my reservations. I just want to raise a few other points. I am opposed to particularly Amendment 184 because I do think it institutionalises further, and it's even got the title of the primacy of the Refugee Convention, and I think that by emphasising that primacy, it undermines democracy. I listened very carefully to the very expansive debate on the first group on refugee family reunion, and I thought one of the most insightful comments was made by a very moving contribution by Baroness Neuberger about her own family's experience of refugees fleeing Nazi anti-Semitism. And it was a reminder of that particular historic period. But it was also a reminder of the importance of historic specificity, which I think matters today, because today, such a joyous day, by the way, in relation to the return of the hostages, coming home, I spent most of the morning crying, but with joy in this instance. Yes, Jew hatred is alive today. It's still happening. But it's not the Nazis, it's not the Second World War. This is a completely different version, something else happening. And it's that issue of history is one of the reasons why I wanted to speak in this group. I've actually long been argued that the Refugee Convention is long past its historic sell-by date, and that it is time for us to consider leaving it or maybe amending it in some way, as has been discussed. So I am glad that the noble Baroness Chakrabarti, has given us a chance to consider the issue. Of course, when the Refugee Convention was established in 1951, it had noble aims. It was designed for a world coming to terms with the aftermath of a world war and mass displacement. But if you think about even the way the term refugee is used today, it has become so expansive and flexible that it has been used recently to describe a trans-identifying burglar from Algeria, a Zimbabwean paedophile who says, and both of them say, that they're entitled to the same protection as women and children fleeing a war zone. Earlier today, the noble Baroness Lady Hamwee said that language and words matter, and I agree. And in this instance, I think the word refugee has become completely corrupted and confused. So I think we urgently need to review terms like refugee as interpreted by today's reading of the Refugee Convention, because I think it stokes resentment amongst the public, and it actually harms the interests of those who might be legitimately refugees fleeing protection, and bundles up a whole lot of things. The history of the Convention means that it's something that we can see is not, as has been described, the rule of law, an act of God that cannot be challenged at any time, because actually it's got an interesting history. As I say, established in 1951, it was a practical solution to the existence of hundreds of thousands of people in Europe who've still not been resettled after Second World War. It's interesting that when it was introduced, the Convention only applied to refugees in Europe, and only in respect of those who'd acquired that status due to the events that happened before 1951. The Convention therefore has changed because it did not assist with refugees who fled Hungary in 1956. That didn't mean that people weren't humane in 1956, but the Convention was not something that could just be used, as is regularly done, to say, where's your humanity? Don't you care about refugees? It was very specific. It was only in 1967 that the regional and temporal limits of the Refugee Convention were lifted to give rights to refugees around the world. And that was motivated, as many historians have noted, was motivated by the Cold War. Actually, it was used to say all refugees are welcome in the West, and to show the superiority of democracy over communism. And there was actually rather a small number of refugees who came on that basis. With the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, the Refugee Convention seemed to lose its raison d'etre. And it's interesting that in 2004, Tony Blair, no less, noted how the convention, quote, first introduced in 1951 at a time when the Cold War and lack of cheap air travel made long-range migration far more difficult than it has become today, has started to show its age. Following Blair's lead, the Conservative Party, in 2005 general election, had a manifesto commitment to withdraw from the convention. There has, in other words, been discussions about whether it's showing its age. I'd say the Refugee Convention is not just showing its age, but it's outlived its usefulness, and it does shackle democracy. And so my concern about this amendment is it tries to do what I think is already a problem, which is that we spend all of our time in this chamber scrutinising pieces of law. And if we're then told, no, you can't do that because of the Refugee Convention, or if in fact we pass laws and in fact they are usurped by the Refugee Convention through the laws, through the courts, what is the point of democracy? What is the point of the decision-making here if they are so undermined by international treaties? I think, therefore, the Refugee Convention betrays democracy and it betrays the public. If one gets frustrated in this place that laws are made and conventions are then used to undermine those laws, can you imagine what it's like being a voter? I know it's been a while for a lot of us, but I think it's worth remembering their frustration is even more palpable. This does not help refugees. It is a way of bypassing democratic accountability and actually is a hindrance and not a help to refugees or the British public.
Yeah.